Coming up this weekend at lightweight, we honestly have one of the easier fights to break down and preview, but one of the tougher fights to actually give you a prediction on. We have Alexander Hernandez. The nickname is The Great. And in his last 5 fights, it's been the mixed bag. I mean, 3-2 with the one win over Francisco Trinaldo that kind of bookends it. That was Texas judging at its best. And for Renato Moicano, 2-3. And you look at the losses that he has: 1 to Jose Aldo by knockout, 1 to the Korean Zombie by knockout, a win over Damir Hadzovic, a loss to Fizzy by knockout, and a win over Jai Herbert that kind of ages well, I guess. But when I do look at this fight, Moicano's one of those guys that he can strike. He can strike. He's a good striker, but he tends to strike for too long. And then once he strikes for too long, he gets knocked out. And for Alexander Hernandez, he can wrestle. He can wrestle, but he can get caught with his wrestling, and he can also get caught in some of the striking too. Knockout loss to Drew Dober. He has a loss by decision to Thiago Moises. And the wins that he has, again, I mentioned Trinaldo earlier, a win over Chris Gritzmacher, and a win over Mike Breeden, who came in on short notice for Leonardo Santos. And that one is just a tough fight to really try and put too much stock into.
They should call this fight Alexander Hernandez and the lessons he could have learned from Cowboy, because whatever he learned in that fight is 100% applicable to this one. You have a long-range striker who uses middle attacks, sort of straight punches and knees up the middle, who has good jiu-jitsu and relies a lot on leg kicks. It sounds a lot like Cowboy Cerrone. And the weird thing for Moicano is that I don't think he's a bad striker by any means. Go back and watch the Calvin Kattar fight. He beat the brakes off Calvin Kattar, and that fight was only on the feet. But he needs the leg kick and the body kick to really set everything else up on the feet. And I think it's going to be very similar in this matchup too with Alexander Hernandez, because Hernandez is weird. He's definitely got better, don't get me wrong. But has he gotten better at the things that you would really like to see him get better at for him to make the most out of his MMA skill set? Because with Hernandez, he was going to move down to 145, and then he lost to Drew Dober, and then, I'll stick around, fight Gritzmacher. Well, that was a good win. We'll see how I do against Moises. There's always an oh, by the way, it seems like, with Alexander Hernandez, and I never really know where his ceiling is at this stage. You can ask some people what their opinion of Hernandez is, and they're like, hey, he's still a bright young talent, and he could get into the top 15 at some point. And other people think oh, that punk, he's never going to turn into anything. So this should be a really fun fight, and I think you set it up perfectly. It's an easy fight to break down, but a very hard one to predict.
So it's a really weird one. I mean, you look at it for Alexander Hernandez, he's never been submitted. And if you look at it for Moicano, he's a decent striker. He's never knocked anybody out, and he has plenty of submission wins. And if you look at all of his losses, they're all by finish, and one of them by submission, and the other one's by knockout. So it really has been weird for Renato Moicano. This is a guy that's main evented, albeit, 2.5 years ago against the Korean Zombie, a poster that is very cheap, autographed on the UFC's website. That's not a promo, but it's just the truth. And Moicano was one of those guys coming out of Jungle Fight that had a lot of hype behind him. And I mean, realistically, if he was able to get the win at UFC 214 over Brian Ortega, who knows where we could be? Who really does know? I mean, wins over Tom Ninamaki, who really didn't have it all together with the UFC. A split win over Zubair Takuyawa. A split win over PFL's own Jeremy Stevens. And so on and so forth. I mean, it just has been a weird run for Renato Moicano. And now when I look at it, I mean, for Moicano at lightweight at 32, honest to goodness, to try and project a ceiling on either one of these guys. On Hernandez's best day, he knocks out one of the top 5 lightweights in the world in Beneil Dariush. But on his worst day, you're losing to fringe 15 guys. And for Moicano, on your best day, you're almost beating title contenders at 145. And on your worst day, you're getting knocked out by Fiziev, who's a very good striker. You're getting knocked out by the Korean Zombie. You're getting knocked out by Jose Aldo. It's just, even though the 5-on-in for Renato Moicano is so spread out, that Aldo fight was almost 3 years ago. It's just, knockout losses like that kind of change the way that people fight. Usually, they do anyway.
I like Moicano's game a lot more than I like Alexander Hernandez's, though. If we take the fighter out of it and we just look at both guys' skill sets, Moicano, everything he does fits together. He attacks the legs to the body, tires you out, tries to get you to the mat, but can also volume strike. All those things work together, and there is direct synergy in his game. Here's the one knock I have against Alexander Hernandez that I feel like people don't talk about this enough. He moves too much on the feet. Way too much. He's never in a set stance where, okay, now I'm moving forward with my combinations, now I'm moving backwards. He's always doing this very erratic movement on the outside, and I don't think it helps him at all in his fights.
Sometimes he does the thing, yeah, you're right. It's not so much You see it. TJ Dillashaw is my biggest example, but there's a lot of fighters that do it. And you know the example I'm going to go with. I'm throwing my hand out here. I'm throwing my hand out here. I'm throwing hip feints, and I'm really throwing people off with my striking. Hernandez does this weird thing where he plants his feet, puts his head out, and then puts his hands out, but
it's like he's playing perimeter defense in a basketball game. Like, he almost widens his stance and goes from left to right. And it does make him more elusive, don't get me wrong, but here's the problem.
It hasn't really caught him yet either.
But it had, Cowboy knocked him out because of it, because he just kept on meeting him with a knee because he was moving his head a lot. Like, with Hernandez, the bare bones of his game are very positive, but I know we're going to talk about Casey O'Neill, Roxanne Modafferi later. Roxanne's kind of similar. Like, the bare bones of her game is really good, but at this stage of her career, there's some holes in it, right? With Hernandez, I like his wrestling. I like his power punching. I hate how hittable he is on the feet, though, and I don't like his in-fight adjustments at all, because I've yet to see him make, real key fight-changing adjustments in a fight. He's been around for a long enough time.
And if you look at it, striking-wise, Moicano strikes at a much higher rate. Hernandez has a negative strike differential if we're going that way. Again, it's not like Hernandez getting knocked out in similar fashion to Moicano, but when Moicano's fighting guys like Jose Aldo and the Korean Zombie, it is a little bit different. So when we look at the odds for this one, Hernandez opened a plus 155, plus 145 right now. For Moicano, opened a minus 180, minus 177 is the average, minus 175, something around there. Tapology vote, surprised that's there to you. So the odds have Moicano to get the win. I'm going to say over under 72.5% Moicano. What would you say?
I think they'll be above.
Think they're going to be above? They're actually below. 781 total votes, 56% Moicano, 36% by decision, 54% by submission. For the 44% that have Hernandez, 31% decision, 59% by knockout. So, Hernandez knocks out Moicano. Moicano submits Hernandez. I would be surprised if Hernandez put his wrestling shoes on for this fight. So if it's just strictly a stand-up affair, Hernandez has a giant overhand right that is very tough to get out of the way because he has that speed and that power. But when I look at this fight, again, we talked about it. The synergy of Moicano's game, I really like how he's able to bring it together. And especially if you look at it, for Moicano, his last fight's against Jai Herbert, a guy that really was able to get it done over with Cage Warriors in the UFC.
It's been a tough run.
It's been a bit of a mixed bag. If you look at Moicano in his last fight, boy, was he able to string everything together in that one. 5 of 7 in his takedown attempts, 7 minutes and 35 seconds of control time against a good boxer. But that was in 2 rounds, under your total of 10 minutes. That is incredible. So, again, Hernandez is going to be way more difficult to take down than a guy like Herbert because Hernandez has the wrestling, Herbert is a boxer. But in this fight, I do like Moicano for everything that he brings into it.
I really do think we're going to see a similar fight to the Moicano-Cater fight. I think he's going to go to the legs a lot, sort of neutralize the forward movement and the overall aggression of Alexander Hernandez, and just kind of piece him up on the feet with his volume. I think it'll be a really good fight, but I do like Moicano.
Bob Einstein and I, both of us going with Renato Moicano to get the win. Can't wait for this fight. If you have Texas's own Alexander Hernandez out of Factory X Muay Thai, you let us know down below in the comments, as well as if you have American top teams. Renato Moicano, big time fights coming up on this card. Up at the top, Derek Lewis taking on Tai Tuivasa. In the main event, Robert Whittaker taking on the man himself, Israel Adesanya. The champ is here. Can't wait for it. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say,
let's get into it.